Let's talk some more about editing. Right, so I was talking about developmental editing in my previous video. If you haven't watched that one, you maybe should check that one out. I left it on a cliffhanger. If you watch this one first, it kind of ruins that, but that's okay. It'll save you some pain. Let's just jump right in. In my other video, I talked about plot, subplot development. I also addressed character development, consistency, and arc. And then I jumped right into talking about setting with a little bit of a debate there about whether you have too much or too little. And I sided on too much, which I think is debatable, but maybe it's just personal preference. And then I also kind of left my last bit about pacing in a very weird way that may or may not have been a good example of pacing. I might be the only one that found that funny. Anyways, let's talk about voice. Everyone has this tendency to think that when I say voice, I'm talking about point of view. And that's not really it. Everyone has a writing voice, and it sometimes takes a while for you to find it. Maybe some people need to write several books before they're really consistent with their writing voice. Some people have a very, very strong voice from the very get-go. It's kind of like that identifiable thing that makes the book yours. If I picked it up, I would know immediately it was yours. But there's also an aspect of that has nothing to do with your personal writing voice, and that is the voice of the story. You may be writing as someone who lives in Canada, writing about someone in the deep south of the USA with a very southern accent and a whole bunch of community drama that you've never experienced in your life. And it's gonna have a different voice than what you would personally have. The voice is important because it does so many things to convey the plot and the feelings of the characters. Take, for instance, one of my favorite books. Okay, it is the favorite book, and I need to stop feeling kind of embarrassed about that. As someone who writes adult literary and is kind of in that whole scene, I feel it's a little ridiculous to say this, but I'm going to own up to it. My favorite book is The Fault in Our Stars by John Green, and the reason why is the way the voice completely just, it's everything to the plot, you guys, and to what's going on. Your main character, Hazel Grace, has cancer, but her voice is so snarky. And Green just weaves in this humor that sobers you up to the severity of what she's feeling. It's like that moment when you're embarrassed or sad, so you make a joke to cover it up, and everyone who knows you, that's the moment, not when they laugh, but when they realize something's really wrong. And and the book has that effect all because of voice. She's standing on the curb and she's here I am, my oxygen tank, just ball and chain in it here. And clearly it's obnoxious to have to drag that thing around. She doesn't like it, but she's making a joke of it because what else can she do? And that's depressing. But it's told in a way that's entertaining so that you don't feel like you have to sit there and cry about it the entire time. You feel like, okay, well, this is a really horrible situation, but she's so interesting in the way she's handling it that I'm in it. I'm here for this story, and I want to keep going. I think about Hunger Games and how it opens up, and it feels, that's another book that could feel overly depressing, but she mentions Prim, the way she braids her hair and how she cares for her sister. And even though it's a dark and gloomy opening, you have that warm family comfort. And it is part of the voice that goes through the entire book. She steps up as tribute because of her sister. She does things as she does in the arena because she's thinking of her family. And she doesn't want to let everything going on compromise who she is as a person. And she has such strong integrity from the very beginning because you see her making the hard sacrifice to take care of her family. It's that same kind of survival attitude that follows her through the book, but it's not a savage voice. It's a loving caretaker voice. And that's what keeps her from wanting to murder and play the game and deal with the schemes. Voice is really subtle, but it has the biggest impact on how your story is going to be conveyed to the reader. Recently wrote a poem about myself that was really cathartic, that detailed the different pregnancies I have had. only have 2 children, but through the journey to that, I have had several pregnancies. And I could have written it in a voice that was very weepy and emotional and drug it out and talked about sorrow, but I didn't do that. Number one, because that's not how I feel about it. But number two, I didn't want it to be something to be like pitied. I didn't want it to be sad. So I wrote about it in reflection of like how each one of them felt in relation to my family and my marriage and the child I had. So there are moments where it's like, oh, we thought this was going to happen, and then it didn't, but we moved on together. And then there are moments where it was like, oh, that was a close one. I thought that pregnancy was going to be viable and our lives were going to be ruined because we didn't have any money and anything to do to take care of it. And wow, we dodged a bullet. Like it varied, and the voice was very diplomatic about it. It was almost distanced in a way, and that impacted how it came across. So instead of it being all about some weepy sorrow that just makes you feel sorry for me, it ended up being a very proud feminine journey that I spoke of that other women can read and relate to and think, wow, when you look back on it, we've come through a lot. And we are the women we are today because of it. And that's something that you can celebrate and be proud of instead of sitting there feeling like, wow, this was just depressing. Why did I read this? So when you look through your story, you need to pay attention to how the voice is either enhancing or getting in the way of the mood you want to set for the reader. As far as tips to help you figure out voice, I feel like reading it out loud can sometimes help a lot. A lot of the times when you read in your head, you will interject like your own mood and voice into the book. But if you read it aloud to someone else and you are trying really hard to harness the voice of the book as you tell it to them so that it is entertaining to listen to, you find all the inconsistencies very quickly. Or you find places where it reads one way, but you feel something else and it just, something feels off about it. So try reading it out loud and see if that helps you out. You also want to pay very close attention to fluid dialogue. There is nothing that I hate more in a book than when dialogue is very stilted and choppy and just kind of boring. You want to be real. You want your dialogue to feel like this is a conversation you could actually hear. But you don't want it to be so real in the sense that it is as boring as a lot of our daily engagements. Like, hey, how are you? I'm doing good. Thanks for asking. Yeah, I'm great too. Cool. Like, no one wants to read that. It's way more entertaining to be like, hey, what's up? And then go into something that actually matters. But not just the matter of like what is said, but how you structure it. And this goes into the whole debate of should you use said or should you use descriptor words? And personally, said is not dead for me. I love said. It is a word that we are just blind to by this point. We just gloss over it. And I feel like sometimes the more you describe how someone said something, it gets distracting. It's always weird to me when someone writes a question with a question mark and they end it with, he asked. Well, obviously he asked it. There's a question mark. It's redundant. Said is perfectly acceptable there. It is something he said. Whether he said it like a question or exclamation, you know that because of the punctuation and the way it is written. Sometimes you need to rely on punctuation in your stylistic grammar to convey a lot that you are not saying. I am all for subtext. I'm a very heavy subtext reader. I don't like for things to be so on the nose. And I think that a lot of times when I'm reading something and he said as he shrugged, she gasped, she exclaimed, he sighed. Like they don't help me out very much. I would rather know how things are being said because of either number one, what is being said, or number two, the body language that they have towards each other in between the dialogue, what's happening in the story, the setting around them. I like to use all of that to create the mood for how I'm supposed to interpret what is being said rather than just explicitly stating it. Because to me, when I read something explicitly stated, It reads as if the author felt like they had to explain it because all the other elements of the story that are supposed to tell me how it was being said are not working well enough together to convey that. So when you go through and you're looking at your dialogue and you're looking at the way you describe the dialogue, ask yourself if there's any way you can convey that with the other elements of the story so that you don't have to be talking so plainly about it. And in the opposite direction of that, you also don't want to be writing dialogue that is, he said this, she said this, they said that. Like, you need to break it up a little bit. Not every line of dialogue actually even needs a tag. You can actually convey a lot of emotion by having no tag whatsoever and having just a back and forth where the person is keeping up with who said what because they're just so into it and they're following it and they're reading it, they hear it in their head and they can see it. You need to be clever about the way you break it up lengthwise. You don't want something short. You want to say maybe something short here, something a little bit longer. Maybe there's a pause where you describe what's going on and then pick up back into the dialogue. You want it to read like a journey, not a script. One of the fun things you can do when it comes to dialogue, and I know this isn't easy for everyone if you're like editing by yourself, but you should take, even if you can't do it for the whole book, take like a piece of what you've written and give it to somebody and you guys just do the dialogue back and forth like you were doing a play, which I know I just said I shouldn't read like a script, but go with me here. If you can read it back and forth and it's pretty entertaining to you and it doesn't feel awkward or inorganic, then it's probably pretty good. Regardless of whether it's good or bad, you'll probably get some laughs. Even just reading it out loud to yourself, that's always helpful no matter what you're doing in editing, is reading it out loud. If you're a person that doesn't really like to talk or just someone who struggles with dialogue in general and it just doesn't come naturally to you, spend some time reading some books that have dialogue that you really enjoyed and kind of use that as an example. Something I tell my writers all the time: do not limit yourself to your book. When you're struggling with something, step away from the book. Practice outside the book. If it's driving you nuts and you're trying to fix it and you just want to throw it out the window, take the scene out of the book. Give your characters something else that they're talking about and just write a short story as practice. You would be amazed at what it can unlock in your brain to take your characters and put them in a different situation that has nothing to do with that, just to get a feel for how they would just engage with each other. We can become so zeroed in and focused on our current project that we forget that it takes constant writing and all types of writing to be well-rounded and educated and practice. And if you take a moment one day to practice something from your story outside of your story in a different situation, it can inspire something that you end up being very proud of and publish, in a journal as a short story. And that kind of thing helps build up your writer resume as well. So if you're not doing extra writing, you need to ask yourself a serious question about why. Why aren't you doing more writing? I know that's going a little off topic right now, but when it comes to practicing all these elements in developmental editing, you are spending a lot of hours in your book. A lot, and you're reading it over and over and over again. You're going to get sick of it. And if you're not taking a break to write something else, to write short things, regardless of whether you like writing short things and whether you just plan on being a novelist and don't want to do anything with your short stories, you should care about your writer education. Just because you're not in school or can't go to school or don't want to go to school doesn't mean you can't teach yourself by practicing. And it's just so vital. My projects always interlace. They always work together. I will be inspired to write just maybe 4 lines of something that popped in my head while I was cooking in the kitchen, and so I jot it down on my phone. And then later on when I'm writing my novel, which is completely something else that has nothing to do with the lines that I thought of in my head, it works. So I slip it in there. It's just whatever creativity pops into your brain, let it out, whether it's relevant to the book or not. You need to keep the flow going, and you never know where it's going to go. Just like I have no idea where this tangent is going. So maybe I should just stop. So let's slide dialogue right into talk about point of view. The most common point of views that I see in genre fiction is first person, and then third person omniscient and third person limited. Not many people write in second person. My friend Ryan, which he goes by Artem Morris, has 4 books published, but one of them is really, really extra cool because it's written in second person, and I can't pick a favorite. Don't make me pick a favorite, but you guys should check that out. I'll link him below because his book that's written in second person is the one I'm most intimately aware of and have read several times. There are other great examples out there, but he comes to mind because I just love his writing, and he's done it in a way that I've never experienced before in my life. That was the first time I've ever read a book in second person in that style, and it is fascinating. I'm currently working on a short story in second person, and so it is really, really cool. And if you've never experienced it or know even what it is remotely, I would like to challenge you to practice writing. Or did you just hear that? Something in second person just to see what it does to you, what it brings out. It's really fun. But I hear everyone always going back and forth on Twitter talking about whether they like, hey guys, do you prefer first person or third person? And there are perks to either one. I think, a lot of people get caught up in the fact of, well, I like writing in third person. I don't really like doing first person. It just doesn't feel natural to me. It's very author centric. And I get that. Like, some people just have a certain writing comfort zone and they stick in that. But really the best question to ask is the point of view the best for your story? How would your story be impacted if you went and switched this to a different point of view? Which, funny enough, that's actually what happened with Ryan's book. He wrote it in a different point of view and then switched it to second because it added an entirely new delicious element to it. Now, if you're at the point where your book is finished, like you have a full novel and it's finished and you were thinking about changing the POV, do not be scared. Go for it. It's so intimidating, and there is a lot of work you have to put into it, but just dive into it and you won't regret it. You can start out and just do a portion of it and see how you feel. And if it feels like, yes, this is clicking in place, this is exactly where this story needs to go, then just continue on and do it. Yes, it's going to suck to have to just rework everything, but you can do it. Just do it. One of the ways to tell if your POV is not really working is if you feel really distanced from the character in a story where the reader needs to feel close to the character. And if that would be fixed by being in first person point of view, then maybe you should consider doing that. It is a lot more intimate view. You can play a lot more around in the character's actual head, and it's just a lot easier to work in their headspace as opposed to third person. Especially third person omniscient, that feels really distant for me. I have a hard time enjoying third person omniscient, honestly, because I feel like I'm this spectator way up high, just observing everything. And when you are observing from far away, even with an omniscient point of view that knows what everybody's thinking, I feel like I'm never really embodying the character. And if I'm reading a book for escapism, I definitely want to embody the character. Like, I definitely want to be so caught up in their headspace that I feel like the book is happening to me and that I'm there and I'm seeing it and I'm part of it. Third person unlimited is sometimes even more infuriating, but it can work really well. A book I just edited, well, I'm still actually technically in the middle of editing because revisions are going to be coming to me soon to go over. It had POV shifts between chapters, and whatever character that chapter was about, the POV was limited to their perspective. And I think if you were going to go between characters, that is how you're going to have to do it. If you continue an omniscient point of view and you're switching characters and chapters, it's not really going to stand out as a switch. If, say, you have character A and character B, and if this chapter is about character A, but we're hearing a lot about the headspace of character B, it doesn't really feel like I'm seeing things from character A's perspective. So you have to be limited in that situation. And if you're having questions about how to get away with having alternating point of views, that's the solution I would give you. I would tell you to write in third person limited. But also, I think it would be really fascinating to have a first person point of view with different characters in different chapters. So, like, you're really, really in the headspace of the character that the chapter is written from. Actually, that sounds really cool. It would be almost like reading the story over and over again through different eyes. What if like you backtracked a little bit? So chapter 1 has character A's point of view, and then when you pick up in chapter 2 from character B, it's not immediately after that second. It's kind of like they overlap a little bit, so you get that moment of what's happening from both characters' perspectives, like very intimately. That would be really cool. I'm sure there are books out there that have done that, but I'm just thinking about how I haven't read anything recently that does that, and that sounds really neat. But that's a good example of how using the POV actually gives you a completely different feel of the story. First person in that situation would be very intimate, and you would be, it's kind of like, you have a cutesy little couple who are feeling things, they're flirting, and they're starting to fall into like and wondering if they could possibly fall into love. And you hear what he's thinking about her, but then you also get to turn around and hear what she's thinking about him. I just feel like that would be the cutest love story ever. If you took that same story and you told it from a third person omniscient view, I don't think it would be nearly as like touchy-feely in the heart. Like, I don't think I would be, I don't think my little heartstrings would be prickled nearly as much. How do you prickle a heartstring? These are the things I say when I'm on a tangent. I get really excited and then I stop making sense. Similarly to talking about point of view and breaking up point of views through various chapters is book design. I say, what? I am talking about how you design the physical structure of your written story. Are you breaking it up into parts? Are you breaking it up into acts? Do your chapters actually start with some sort of like motivational piece of poetry or a lyric? Are you heavily writing dialogue and using that to move your story through? Or are you starting out each of your chapters with a lot of narration before you actually get into the action? Stylistically, how is your story broken up so that we know where the segments fall? Because then within each chapter, we need to feel like we are getting a full scene. Now, as for what constitutes an actual chapter, page number and word count wise, you're going to have to feel it out. And a lot of people like to be very consistent and have all their chapters run about the same length. A lot of people vary wildly. In the book I was just mentioning that I'm going to be reading revisions for soon, she has broken up the book kind of sporadically in some places. When the action gets really heavy at the end, the chapters get shorter and shorter. And they're from a different point of view, right? So we're getting the perspective of one character very, very quickly, and even just like a matter of a page, and then immediately jumping into another character talking about the same scene. So you're getting a close-eye view of what's going on of this very climactic moment from everybody in a very tight amount of space. I liked that a lot. It worked really well for the story. People have different processes for how they like to go about breaking up their chapters and their acts, and personally, I think that if you're writing a genre piece, you should think cinematically. Like, there are a lot of different like templates that you can use that people talk about. There's like the 3-act structure, and I'll try to find some links for some good articles for that to put below. But whatever you choose to do, you need to make sure that the structuring of it and the way you break it up is serving your story and not leaving your reader at any point unsatisfied or feeling like a cliffhanger is just a little too sharp. Cliffhangers are fun, but it's one thing to have an entire scene that ends on a note where you feel compelled to keep going because something is going to happen that you want to read about. That's entirely different than breaking up your story smack in the middle of the scene and your reader needs to go on to the next story to finish reading what is currently happening. You want a cliffhanger to be all about something that is gonna happen in the future that evokes some sort of emotion out of the reader. You don't want it to be about something that is in the very middle of happening and jerk the reader out and then throw them back in. That's not very effective cliffhanger usage. 2 more things I want to talk about, and they don't have a lot to say about them, but when you are doing a developmental edit, that is when you definitely want to pay attention to sensitivity concerns. If you are doing LGBT and like if you're doing anything that can be considered within the scope of diversity, please be very, very sensitive. And I say that on behalf of like all humans on the planet. If you were writing the perspective of a diverse character that is not your story, you can do that. You are allowed. I feel like anyone can write an expression about anything. But that does put you in a position where you are going to be held accountable to that. You're speaking to someone else's experience, and they have a say in it as a reader to let you know whether you're doing it accurately, whether you're being offensive, whether you are doing it for self-indulgent reasons, or whether you were trying to actually help be a voice and, be supportive of a community that even if you are not personally a part of, you respect and want to see celebrated in literature. When it comes to sensitivity concerns, I think that's something you cannot do by yourself. It's definitely a point where you need to bring in somebody from that perspective with that kind of background and experience to let you know if you are doing it correctly. There's not really any other way to go about that. There's no cheating. Like, you have to have someone's opinion that can vouch for it. You can't just go on assumption. I want to tell you that you are just going to have to deal with a lot of crap from people, because everyone is going to have an opinion and an experience that might be different from yours. I have a close friend who was doing mission work in China, and she wrote a story that involved, characters from that setting. She was heavily criticized by a friend for being insensitive, and she's like, I lived this. Like, how can you be critical of something I went through and experienced? But she took it out because she felt like she might offend other people as well. When it comes to something you have lived through and you are not sure how it'll be received, just speak your truth. Just put it out there. It's you. You can't be any more real than yourself. So if you're writing something very sensitive, and it is every bit something that you are an expert in because it is about you, you're gonna have to just put yourself out there and just put on a little bit of armor to protect yourself against the people who feel like it's their business to come in and say anything about it. Similar to that, you need to be doing some fact checking. If you have anything in your story that someone could look up and realize, oh, you represented that completely incorrectly. Like, if you have any sort of trauma that involves anything medical, if you have weaponry for a war, if anything that you are not completely making up as fictional that can be traced to something that exists in real life, you need to make sure that you are being accurate. You can't have a character have a horrible head injury and next chapter get up and be going somewhere doing something. Can't do that. You either need to make it very clear that there is a time lapse, or you need to walk the character through the journey of recovery. You need to be very realistic about these things. Whether you need help with fact checking or not, I guess that just depends on what you're writing about. It would be very helpful if you're writing about something that you're not super familiar with to consult with somebody who is. There was a really cool thread on Twitter. Oh, if I can find it, I will link it, you guys. But there was this awesome thread where someone was asking, hey, what other skills do you have that writers can consult you and you can be a resource for the things that we're writing in our story? And there are so many people. I came forward talking about how I have experience with home nursing care. There are people that came forward saying that they had served in the military. One guy was like, I know all about old weaponry. Someone else was like, I know all about kung fu. And there were women saying that they knew a lot about child raising, and dads talking about they knew what it was like to stay at home. And then people talking about cooking, and just there was just so much stuff. And so there are a plethora of people out there that can talk to you about things to fact check. So take advantage of that. Okay, that concludes my 2-part video series. Is it a series if it's only 2 parts? About developmental editing. I will be putting together notes regarding line copy. That will probably be multi-video as well. It's really hard to talk about these things very concisely and still give you enough context that you feel like you are learning something and not just having information spouted out at you. So I'm going to try to take my time with these. And as always, subscribe, look at the stuff in the description if you want more information on things. Let me know more of what you want to hear. Dialogue with me anywhere you can find me online. Approach me and talk to me. I love talking to people. Please don't be afraid to message me. I will be your best friend. And if you do nothing else today, guys, go write some words. At least do that. Write me some words, okay? Thanks.